The other day, a friend of mine asked me a weird question. Could a person, theoretically, live on the London Underground? Of course, there are stories about people living on the Tube. I think any subway network will inspire stories about people living down there. There's just something we as a species like about that concept. I guess maybe it calls back to our primeval fears of dark forests and moonlit nights when predators had the advantage. The 1972 horror film Deathline imagines a clan of cannibals living on the Tube, descended from Victorian navvies. I recall an urban legend of a girl living on the Circle Line, simply going round and round unnoticed by passengers. There was once a story in the London Underground staff newsletter about a man who accidentally stepped off at a closed station and had to live as a castaway until he could attract the attention of a driver. Apparently loosely based on something that happened at South Kentish Town. So much for stories. Is it possible for a regular human who isn't protected by being fictional to live there? I do have a friend who lived on buses for a few days using his bus pass, just going up and down all day, grabbing the odd hour of sleep when the routes were handed over to the night buses. It's not a good idea. I do not endorse attempting to live on any form of public transport. But in theory, purely in theory, could you live on the Tube? Well, there is a precedent, of course. During the First and Second World Wars, people famously sheltered from air raids in the underground. They slept down there, they took food with them, they brought books and games. Sort of communities formed down there. Food, drink, medicine, and basic sanitary facilities were supplied. There were even newsletters for shelterers. In fact, the government was afraid at the start of the Second World War that people would get so comfortable down there that they wouldn't want to come up again. This isn't wartime, and fingers crossed we'll never have that problem again. But let's make some assumptions about our theoretical person making their home on the Tube in peacetime. Firstly, let's work on the basis that our fictional denizen of the depths either has money or can obtain money. Why they're living on the Tube, I don't know. The rental market in London is pretty horrendous, though. There are ways to get on the underground network without a ticket, but let's assume that our fellow isn't an experienced fare dodger and buys a ticket to get him through the barriers. This not only makes it easier for him to get on, but also means I don't get in trouble for telling people how to fare dodge. Let's say our man doesn't get noticed by staff and doesn't run into a ticket inspector. In theory, he's basically got the run of the network. Most of the interchanges are behind the ticket barriers, so they could get from Chesham to Morden, Epping to Ealing. The Central Line is a good bet if he wants a kip. It takes about an hour and 25 minutes end to end. It wouldn't be a very comfortable sleep, he'd be turfed off by staff at the end of the line, and if he kept at it, they'd certainly notice him. What about food and drink? There are a number of places on the network where you can get food. For instance, there are kiosks at a number of central London stations. It's mostly snack food and probably not all that nutritious, but it's there. You're not going to starve. So, let's say you're hydrated, you're not dying of scurvy, you're doing all right. But what goes in must come out. So what about toilet facilities? Well, the news there is not so great. The underground is notoriously short of toilet facilities, and if you have to stay behind the barriers, it's even worse. However, the situation is not hopeless. On some of the outer reaches, there are toilets behind the barriers. There are also some at Farringdon. Washing is more difficult. You have hand basins but no showers, and your toiletries are limited to hand soap. There is no way to wash clothes. You're probably going to end up quite stinky quite quickly. But one of the biggest problems with the exercise is London's tubes are not 24-hour. Some routes do run 24 hours a day, but only at weekends. So the absolute longest you could get away with it is from the start of service on a Friday to the end of service on Sunday. I'm not aware of any places where you could hide without being spotted by staff, so most of the time you would have to spend your nights outside of the network. How does our man get out? If he's been on the network for over 48 hours, the barriers will definitely notice that there's something up with his ticket. The only way I can think of for him to get in and out legitimately would be if he had an Oyster travel card, which would be valid for unlimited entrances and exits, and is a lot more flexible about the whole touching in and touching out thing. But if he had that, he wouldn't be limited to the underground itself. He could go out at any station and get food and perhaps even a proper wash. Basically, though, the answer to the question, as I see it, is no. Certainly not comfortably, and likely not at all. Staff do keep their eyes open, and it would be very hard to avoid being noticed. You might get away with it for a day or two, but that's if you're really lucky and pretty cunning. All in all, bad idea. Well, I do hope you enjoyed this, I must emphasize, purely theoretical tale from the tube. If so, please do leave a like and consider subscribing for more. I would like as ever to thank my donors on Ko-fi, on Patreon, and here on YouTube for your generous support. You are the roof to my head. And I'll see you all again very soon. Cheerio.